This is the video for section 3.7 on arguments and truth tables. Pretty much the questions in this particular My Math Lab homework and from this section on the quiz and the test are going to give you a paragraph of 3 sentences. And they're going to say, is this argument valid or is it invalid? And what they really mean by that is if the first 2 sentences both come true, then is the third and final sentence a logical conclusion or not? So again, if we assume that the first 2 sentences come true, is the third and final sentence in the paragraph a logical conclusion? If it is, then we'd say this is a valid argument. If the first 2 sentences come true, but the last sentence is not a logical conclusion, or it's illogical, we would say it's an invalid argument. So valid or invalid will be the answer for every single one of these. And then the homework wants us to type in the 3 sentences into symbolic form as one line, which is going to follow the same pattern for each one of these. And don't worry, we're going to do several examples here in this video. Now there are 2 different ways that we can get the right answer of valid or invalid. The first way is we can use a truth table. The bad part about that is it's really time consuming if we choose to use a truth table. So the other way that I like to check for each problem to hopefully be able to avoid the truth table is quicker. And the quicker way is to see if we can find a match of symbolic form with the 3 sentences in this table that's on the bottom of this slide. So this is the standard forms of arguments table. And you can find this table within our Canvas course. So when you go to our course in Canvas, look through the buttons that are on our class homepage, and one of our buttons is going to take you to the note packets and formula sheets from my face-to-face version of this course. And if you look through the formula sheets for Chapter 3, you're going to find this table on one of those formula sheets. Feel free to print that out, because you're going to need it close by when you do this entire section's homework. If you have any trouble finding that button on our homepage or finding this table, let me know through Canvas message, and I can email you a copy of the document, and or I can direct you to how to find this chart right down here. But the problem is that not every single question you're going to be able to use this chart for. So when we can use the chart, we want to do so because that will allow us to avoid doing a super lengthy truth table. But when we cannot use this chart, then we will have to use a truth table as a backup plan. So 2 different ways to find the answer to these questions. And I'll show you both ways, don't worry. But example 1 says, to use a truth table to determine whether the following argument is valid or invalid. I study for 5 hours or I fail. I did not study for 5 hours, therefore I failed. So these questions are 3 steps, no matter which way you choose to get the right answer. And the first 2 steps are the same every time. So step 1, just like earlier in the chapter, we're going to assign letters to every idea in the argument that we are analyzing. That's that 3-sentence paragraph. So as I look through this argument, let P equal, the first idea I see when I reread the 3 sentences again is about I study for 5 hours. So let's let P represent the idea that I study for 5 hours. Now, if they change the verb tense on you at all, it does not matter. So if like the second sentence said I studied past tense or I am studying present tense, it doesn't matter. It's still the same idea. So it's still letter P. The second idea, Q, is about I fail. I fail, and then later on I see I failed. So that whole idea about failing, that's going to be letter Q. And as I looked through that paragraph, those are the only two ideas that are mentioned. So this particular example only has a P and a Q. Now that I have assigned letters, I'm going to rewrite all three sentences in symbolic form. When I first do the symbolic form, I'm going to stack the three sentences right above each other like they have here in this example. So this is going to always be step 2. Now that you've assigned letters, rewrite all the sentences, all three sentences in symbolic form, meaning rewrite them with the arrows and the letters. So the first sentence again was I study for 5 hours, which was letter P. Or is the disjunction down arrow. I promise I'm not drawing the letter V. This is supposed to be a down arrow. I just have messy handwriting. I fail is letter Q. So after we rewrite the first sentence, I study for 5 hours or I fail, it's P or Q. P down arrow Q. Now, right below that, let's rewrite the second sentence in symbolic form. The second sentence was I did not study for 5 hours. Negation not is the squiggle or the tilde, so that's squiggle. Study for 5 hours was letter P, so we end up with squiggle P, negation P. Before the last sentence, the conclusion, just like you see here, you're always going to draw a big long line, that bar, and below the bar will always be the third sentence, the conclusion in symbolic form. The conclusion will always begin with the word therefore, so, consequently. The way that we write the word therefore in math is we take 3 dots and we draw the 3 dots in a triangle shape. And if you look at the table on the bottom of the screen, you'll see every single one of those boxes has those 3 dot triangles. And that's just math language trying to be all fancy here. But that means therefore, or anything synonymous with therefore, consequently so. And then the conclusion after the word therefore is I failed, which was our letter Q. And again, don't worry, we're going to do several of these examples. The good news is that they all follow the same format, so once you get the hang of it, they're not that bad. But step 2, we rewrote all 3 sentences in symbolic form and we stacked them up. So now we're ready for the final step, step 3. So step 3 is where we have a choice. Even if the directions say to use a truth table, I would encourage you to check the standard forms of argument chart first. Because here's the thing. If I can find an exact match with my step 2, I don't have to draw a truth table at all, and I'm going to save myself a ton of time. So let's look at every single box in the table and see if we can find an exact match to, we got P or Q, not P, therefore Q. And I do have an exact match, I'll circle it now, right here. If you look closely, that exact match, P or Q, not P, therefore Q, is in the first row. The first row are all the valid arguments, whereas the second row, the bottom row, are all the invalid arguments. My match was in the first row, which is the valid argument row. Therefore, this is a valid argument. Done. Yay, no truth table required. So even though the directions say use a truth table, if I can find an exact match with the standard forms of argument chart, I don't actually need to do a whole big truth table. If I want to be fancy, and the homework might even ask you, why is this valid? Simply look at the label of that box. So here's my match in this box right here, and this box is the disjunctive reasoning box. So I could say that this argument is valid by disjunctive reasoning. Now here's the thing, because a lot of times people will say, I don't need to use the chart or do a truth table. I can just logically figure out if this is valid or invalid just in my mind without doing all this symbolic form. Unfortunately, the homework before you move on to the next question is going to make you type in the whole argument as one-line symbolic form. So even if you're like, hey, I didn't do step 1, I didn't do step 2, I knew this was a valid argument, unfortunately, it's now going to say, in this answer box, type in the symbolic form. And that symbolic form that they want you to use in the My Math Lab homework is going to follow the same format every time. So we're going to take our symbolic form from step 2, but we got to rearrange it into one line, into one answer box. So remember, the whole point of this is we are checking, so I'm going to write bracket. We're going to take line 1, and we're asking ourselves if line 1 and line 1 are both true. Notice I said the word and, so there's always going to be an up arrow, that conjunction up arrow, and you can use your answer template that'll appear below the answer box to get the arrow in there. So if line 1 and line 2 are both true, close your bracket, then is line 3 a valid conclusion. So if line 1 and line 2 are true, then, notice I said the words if then, because I'm trying to emphasize you're always going to have an if then arrow that you're going to type in after the bracket. So then is line 3 a logical conclusion. So this is going to be the format for your symbolic form that they want you to type into the homework. So you're always going to have brackets, line 1, and you're always going to have an and arrow, and you're always going to have an if then arrow outside the brackets, line 3. The only thing you may or may not have are going to be the open parentheses. You only need the open parentheses if you have an arrow. So let me show you what I mean by this. Let's do this particular example that we just did. Let's rewrite it in one line symbolic form. So I'm going to erase a little bit to create some room here. So we already know that this is valid. We would select from the multiple choices. And then next to valid, when it says write it in symbolic form, here we go. So we said every single question is going to have brackets. So you would type in a closed left bracket from your keyboard. Now, as I look at line 1, here's line 1. The P or Q was line 1. The I study for 5 hours or I fail was line 1. That was P or Q. Because there is an arrow there, I also need open parentheses. P or Q, close the open parentheses. So if you have arrows as part of the lines, you need the open parentheses. Every single one of these is going to have the up arrow. So now you're going to use the answer template that'll appear to type in the up conjunction arrow. Line 2 was negation P, squiggle P for I did not study for 5 hours. There is no arrow in line 2, so I do not need the open parentheses. I would just simply type in squiggle, that's the negation P. Use the template that'll appear to get the squiggle in there. Use the keyboard to type in a lowercase p, and then we close the brackets. We always have the closed brackets. Every single one has an if then arrow. Line 3 was Q. That was the I failed conclusion. There is no arrow there, so I do not need the open parentheses, and you type in Q. So when the homework and the test asks me to type this in symbolic form, this right here that I'm circling is what I would type in. I would use that same format to mush the 3 lines from step 2 as one line symbolic form. I would always have closed brackets around the first 2 lines. I'd always have the up arrow, the conjunction, using the answer template to get any arrow in, by the way. in between the first two lines, and I'd always have the if-then conditional arrow outside right after that right bracket. And then the open parentheses you would only need if there's an arrow within that line. Let's do a few more examples to get the hang of it. Before I move on though, I do want to do this example as a truth table in case you are curious or in case you do need to use a truth table in any of these. So for this particular example, we knew it was valid because we found an exact example in the table. But if we could not find an exact match rather. We found an exact match in the table. If we could not find an exact match from step 2, we would have to, unfortunately, do a truth table. So you would use this symbolic form. This is why the homework wants you to practice that one-line symbolic form. And you would do a truth table for that one-line symbolic form. If at the very end, your final answers, which would go under the if-then arrow, are all trues, you'd say valid. If you have any F's as part of the final answer in the truth table, you would say this is invalid. So let's do a big old truth table here. So again, this is if you cannot find an exact match on the handout, a valid or invalid match, you would have to, as a last resort, a backup plan, do this truth table. So I'm going to do the truth table for the big, long symbolic form. Let's do it in red because I got big old handwriting. I'm going to have to write over top of some things here. So we have a P, we have a Q, and this whole long line. Actually, let's move this over more because I'm going to need it out of room. But this whole long line, I'm about to erase it, so bear with me. But this is what I would do the truth table about. And we had two letters. We had a P, we had a Q. So we have bracket, parenthesis, we had P or Q was our line 1. We had the and arrow, not P was line 2, close the bracket, if then arrow, Q was the conclusion. So I would do the truth table for the one line symbolic form. Two letters, so setting up the truth table would be TT, true, true, TF, true, false, FT, false, true, or false, false. And to start, we would do any open parentheses from left to right first. So the open parentheses, I see the letter P, so copy and paste the P line over, which is TTFF. TTFF. Line 2, step 2 would be Q. It's a normal Q, so copy and paste the Q line over. TF, TF. So TF, TF. Step 3, now I complete the open parentheses. It's an or arrow, so looking at your handout, if you look up disjunction or, it's true as long as there's not two F's. So two T's make another T. TF makes another T as long as there's at least one T. The final answer is true. FT makes a T. Two F's makes a false. Once you finish up everything in parentheses, you only need to keep what you did last. So I'm going to get rid of steps 1 and 2 and just keep the TTTF in blue. Now, brackets are a type of parenthesis. So after you've done all of the open parentheses, go ahead and finish up everything in the closed brackets. So I cannot do an arrow, cannot do this and arrow here until I have answers on both sides of the arrow. So step 4 is going to be to negate P. Take the opposite of the P column. If P is currently going TTFF, the opposite would be FFTT. Now I can complete the brackets. So step 5 would be to do the and arrow, applying it to steps 3 and 4. So to the or and to the negation P. If you look up the conjunction and arrow on your formula sheet, the only time it's true is when there are two T's, which would be line 3. So TF makes an F, TF makes an F. On the bottom row, FT makes an F. So I have FFTF. You only need to keep what you've done last, the arrow you've done last, when you finish any type of parenthesis set up. So since I'm finished with the brackets, I can now get rid of steps 3 and 4. Now, before I can get the if-then arrow, the final answers, I need to have stuff again on both sides of the arrow. So I need to fill out Q, which would be step 6, on the right side of the arrow. We're going to copy and paste Q, which is TF, TF. And last step 7, finally the if-then arrow. I'm applying it to the previous 2 steps, which is steps 5 and 6, the and arrow and the Q. If you look up if-then, it's only false if you have T pointing to F, which does not happen at all here. So F pointing to T makes it true, 2 F's makes a T, 2 T's makes a T, 2 F's makes a T. So what you'll do at the end of this long truth table is you'll look at your final answers under the if-then arrow. If all the final answers are trues, that means that you have a valid argument. If you have any F's, any false whatsoever, under the if-then arrow, the final answer is invalid. You can see what I mean by you'll want to check the standard forms of arguments chart first because it's going to save you a ton of time. This truth table is very, very long if you have to do the truth table. Let's do a few more examples. Example 2 says to translate the argument into symbolic form, then determine whether the argument is valid or invalid. If he likes to eat steak, he will not go out to eat. He will go out to eat, so he does not like to eat steak. All right, so here we go, 3 steps. Step 1, let's assign letters. So as I reread that paragraph, the first idea I see is about likes to eat steak. So let P represent he likes to eat steak. Let Q represent the second idea, which is going out to eat. He will go out to eat. And as I reread the paragraph, those are the only 2 ideas I see about likes to eat steak, will go out to eat. So now we're ready for step 2, which is to rewrite in symbolic form where you stack the 3 sentences. So the first sentence says if. It does not say the word then. However, the then is implied. It's not if and only if, it just says the word if. So I need an if-then arrow. On the if side of the arrow, if he likes to eat steak would be P. Then, the other part of the sentence, he will not go out to eat. So not means we need the negation squiggle. Go out to eat is Q. So if P, then not Q is the first sentence. Second sentence, he will go out to eat, which is letter Q. And then we always draw that bar, even if the question doesn't have the bar. I know this one does, but even if it doesn't, we always draw that bar before the third sentence. We see the word though. No, actually we see so. I'm sorry. So we see the word so. It means the same as therefore. So, therefore, consequently, we always draw the 3 dots in the triangle shape in front of the third sentence, the conclusion. So is it a logical conclusion that he does not like to eat steak? So not means we need the squiggle. Eat steak was P. So therefore, squiggle P, negation P. Okay, so step 3. Now we're ready for step 3. Let's see if we can find a match with our step 2 symbolic form and the standard forms of argument chart. If we cannot find a match, we would have to do that big truth table. So as we look carefully here, I'm looking. And we have not an exact match, but we have something very close that I'm circling right here. So if it matches the concept that the letters are showing, you can consider that a match. So if I look closely to what I've circled, the only difference is that I have Q up here and negation Q down here. Whereas what I wrote, I have negation Q first and then Q there. If you think about it, all that this is saying is that the opposite of letter Q should be in line 2. And I have that here. I have negation Q and its opposite, regular Q line 2. I still have P in front of the if then arrow. I still have the conclusion being therefore not P. So I do have a match in this box right here. Yeah, the Q and the negation Q are switched, but it's still the same idea that you take the opposite of Q as line 2. So for that reason, it is in the top row, which is the valid arguments row. So this is a valid argument. Now, after I select valid argument, the homework is going to ask me to rewrite the symbolic form as one line symbolic form. So remember, it's the same format for all of these. I would start with the bracket. If I look at line 1, there's an arrow, an if-then arrow. So I do need open parentheses around line 1. Line 1 was P, if P, then not Q. Close the open parentheses. What do we always have in between the first two lines is the and up arrow. Remember, if line 1 and line 2 are true, then can we conclude line 3. So you'll always have that and arrow. Line 2 was just Q, no arrow, so I do not need open parentheses, but close your bracket after line 2. Always have the if-then conditional arrow after the right bracket. Not P does not have an arrow, so it does not need open parentheses either. So you type in that squiggle P after the if-then arrow. And here is the one-line symbolic form. Now, because this was a trickier question, if you did not see that there is really a match here with the contrapositive reasoning, you would have to do the whole truth table for this one-line symbolic form, and you'd have to see, okay, do I have all trues, all T's under the if-then arrow? If so, the answer is valid. If there are any F's, any false under the if-then arrow, you would select invalid. Let's try a few more examples. So example 3, use a truth table. Actually, we're not hopefully going to have to use a truth table. So even if it says it in the directions, let's wait to see if we can just find a match on the chart instead to determine whether the following argument is valid or invalid. If you lower the fat in your diet, you lower your cholesterol. If you lower your cholesterol, you reduce the risk of heart disease. Therefore, if you do not lower the fat in your diet, you do not reduce the risk of heart disease. So here we go again. Step 1, as usual, let's assign our letters. So you got to reread the paragraph. And the first idea we see, let P represent you lower the fat in your diet. I'm just going to write lower the fat. So lower the fat in your diet is the first idea. Q, the second idea, is you lower your cholesterol. I'm just going to write lower cholesterol. And this is our first example where we have a third idea. So we see lower cholesterol again, which is still letter Q, but the third idea, which will be R, is reduce the risk of heart disease. Reduce risk of heart disease. So if you skim that paragraph, the only ideas are about lowering fat, lowering cholesterol, and reducing the risk of heart disease. So we're done with step 1. We have our letters assigned. Now we're ready for step 2, where we will rewrite all 3 sentences in symbolic form. This is the stacked symbolic form step. So again, the first sentence, I see the word if. It's not if and only if. So it must be an if-then arrow, where the then is implied. So on the if side of the if-then arrow was if you lower the fat, which was P, so if P, then you lower your cholesterol is Q. So if P, then Q is the first sentence. The second sentence, if you lower your cholesterol, again, we just see the word if, which means if then. So if you lower your cholesterol was Q, so if Q, then you reduce the risk of heart disease, which is R. So if Q, then R. Before the third sentence, we always draw that big old bar. Therefore, which is the 3 dots in the triangle shape. If, again, if you do not lower the fat in your diet, so negation P, so if squiggle P, then you do not reduce the risk of heart disease. So another not, so another squiggle negation. Heart disease was R. So if not P, then not R. Step 3, here's where we see, can we avoid, hopefully, having to do the whole truth table and save ourselves a bunch of time? And as I look for a match, there is an exact match in the bottom right corner. So that bottom right corner says if you conclude either R then P, or if not P then not R, you can say there's a match with the bottom right corner. That is in the bottom row, which is the invalid argument row. So this is an invalid argument by misuse of transitive reasoning. So I would select invalid as the final answer for this question. Now let's go ahead and talk about how would we type in the one-line symbolic form into the answer box. So I'm going to erase a little bit. So the symbolic form that the My Math Lab homework wants, remember we're following the same format. We begin with a left bracket. Line 1 has an arrow. It's if P then Q. So because it has an arrow, we need open parentheses around it. So if P then Q. Remember, what do we always have between the first 2 lines is the and arrow. So up conjunction arrow. Line 2 also has an arrow for a change, so it also needs open parentheses. If Q then R was line 2, close the bracket after line 2. What do we always have after the brackets are the if then arrow, and the conclusion even had an arrow, so it also needs open parentheses. If not P, then not R. So there is the symbolic form as one line with that and arrow in the brackets and the if then arrow outside the brackets. Don't ever hit spacebar. Need to use lowercase letters. Use the answer template to get in all the arrows and the squiggle negation, or you could even use the keyboard for the squiggle negation. Let's try 3 more just to make sure we have it down pat. And you can see, even though it's going to be the same directions, sometimes they don't break up the 3 sentences for you. They just put it all together as a paragraph, but the steps are the same as the good news. So for all 3 problems, A, B, and C, we're just going to determine if the following arguments are valid or invalid. So starting with problem A, the emergence of democracy is a cause for hope, or environmental problems will overshadow any promise of a bright future. Environmental problems will not overshadow any promise of a bright future. Therefore, the emergence of democracy is a cause for hope. So I know this one is extra wordy. It doesn't matter. It's going to be the same steps as usual. So step 1, I'll do up here with my big old handwriting, but we're still going to always assign letters first. And as I reread that big old paragraph, the first idea that I see throughout the paragraph is about the emergence of democracy is a cause for hope. So I'm just going to put democracy hope to summarize that because it is super wordy. So P represents the emergence of democracy is a cause for hope. The second different idea, which I'll call Q, is about environmental problems will overshadow any promise of a bright future, which is mighty depressing. Thank you, my math lab, for these examples. But we'll go with it. So Q is about the environmental problems will overshadow any promise of a bright future. I'm just going to write environmental future just to summarize that wordy phrase. And as I look at the other sentences, I don't see any other ideas. It's just more about the environmental problems and the emergence of democracy. So, only two different ideas, so two different letters. Step 2, now we're going to rewrite it in symbolic form. We're going to stack them to begin. So the first sentence, the emergence of democracy is a cause for hope, was letter P. Or is the arrow pointing down, environmental problems will overshadow any promise of a bright future, was Q. So really the first sentence is P or Q. The second sentence, which I'll put below the first line, is environmental problems will not overshadow any promise of a bright future. So not means we need the negation squiggle. Environmental problems was Q. So that's not Q, negation Q. And I know my handwriting is extra bad because there's little space to write. I promise this right here is supposed to be that squiggle tilde. Now, before the last sentence, even if they give it to you as a big old paragraph, you're always going to draw that underline. Therefore, 3 dots in the triangle shape. The emergence of democracy as a cause for hope is P. So therefore, P. So we got P or Q, negation Q, therefore P. So now we're ready for step 3. Let's see if we can find a match. And hopefully an exact match. If we can't find an exact match, we'll see if it matches the concept, like example 2. And as we're looking, I do find an exact match, yay, right here. It's in the top row, which is the valid arguments row. So I can say this is valid reasoning by disjunctive reasoning. So this is a valid argument by disjunctive reasoning. If it asked you for the one-line symbolic form, you type in the bracket first. Line 1, we need open parentheses because there's an arrow there, P or Q, close it. Always the and up arrow. Line 2 was squiggle Q, no arrow, so I do not need the open parentheses, close the brackets. If then arrow after the brackets, P was the conclusion. So there is the symbolic form as one line that you would need to type into the answer box. Now let's try another problem. Same directions, valid or invalid. I'm looking at question B. Question B says, if the defendant's DNA is found at the crime scene, then we can have him stand trial. He is standing trial. Consequently, we found evidence of his DNA at the crime scene. So step 1, let's assign our letters as usual first. So let's let P represent the defendant's DNA is found at the crime scene. So I'm just going to write P equals DNA at scene. The second idea, Q, is about we can have him stand trial. So I'm just going to write trial. And as I look through the rest of the paragraph, those are the only 2 ideas I see over and over again about DNA at the crime scene and standing trial. So we are now ready for step 2, which is to rewrite the 3 sentences in the stacked symbolic form. Going back to the first sentence, I see if then, so I need the if then arrow. On the if side of the arrow, the defendant's DNA is found at the crime scene was P. Then we can have him stand trial is Q. So the first sentence in symbolic form is if P, then Q. The second sentence, he is standing trial, was letter Q. Before the third sentence, draw your big old bar. Consequently means the same as therefore, so that's the 3 dots in the triangle shape. We found evidence of his DNA at the crime scene is the last sentence, which is P. So therefore, P. Now we're ready for step 3. Look for an exact match, or at least a match of the concepts. So I'm looking, and we do have an exact match on the bottom left corner. And this is the bottom row, which is the invalid argument row. So the final answer would be invalid. If they ask why, by fallacy of the converse. And to rewrite the symbolic form as one line, you would type in the bracket first. The first line has an arrow, so it needs open parentheses around it. So open parenthesis, if P then Q, close it, and Q does not have an arrow, so line 2 does not need open parentheses, close with a bracket. Before the third line, if then arrow, the conclusion is just P, no arrow again, so no open parentheses needed around line 3. So this would be the symbolic form as one line. Bracket, parenthesis, P, if then arrow, Q, close the parenthesis, and Q, close bracket, if then arrow, P. And finally, one last one. And the last question part is C. If you mess up, your self-esteem goes down. If your self-esteem goes down, everything else falls apart. So if you mess up, everything else falls apart. Another depressing example from my math lab, but let's just go with it. So it's the same 3 steps. So step 1, we're going to assign our letters. P is going to be you mess up. The second idea, Q, is going to be your self-esteem goes down. I'm just going to write self-esteem just to kind of abbreviate because I'm running out of room as usual. The second sentence mentions self-esteem going down again, but there is a third idea, which is everything else falls apart. So R is the everything else falls apart. I'll just write everything else falls to abbreviate it. So there are 3 different ideas mentioned over and over again between the 3 sentences. On to step 2. Now we're going to rewrite the 3 sentences in symbolic form. The first sentence has the word if, so that's an if then arrow. If you mess up, which was P, which I did mess up by accidentally erasing that. There we go. So P was mess up. So if P, then your self-esteem goes down. Self-esteem was Q. So if P, then Q is the first sentence. The second sentence is another if for if then arrow. If your self-esteem goes down was Q again. Then everything else falls apart was R. Do that big old bar before the third sentence. So it means the same as therefore, so I'm going to always do the 3-dot triangle. If you mess up, so another if then arrow. If you mess up was P, then everything else falls apart was R. Therefore, if P then R is the conclusion. Now we're ready to see if we can find an exact match. If not, we would have to do a truth table. However, I do see, yay, an exact match. It is right here, which is the top row for valid. So this is a valid argument. If it asks you why in the homework, by transitive reasoning. So now we know it's valid for the final answer. Let's rewrite this as one line symbolic form. So to rewrite the symbolic form as one line, you would do the bracket first. Line 1 has an arrow, so it needs open parentheses around it. If P, then Q, close it. Always the and arrow, the up arrow. in between line 1 and line 2. Line 2 also has an arrow, so it also needs open parentheses. If Q, then R, close the open parentheses, close the bracket. There's always an if, then arrow before the conclusion and outside the bracket. The conclusion also had an arrow, so it also needs open parentheses. If P, I have to erase a little bit here, then R was that conclusion. Is that if, then arrow? There we go. And this whole thing is what you would type in for symbolic form. And again, remember, this was a valid argument. So that's the same pattern pretty much for all of section 3.7.